It is Monday, July the 27th, 99 days until the midterm elections. Donald Trump returned to the campaign trail today, ostensibly to trump for swing state candidates. But his real strategy runs on a parallel track that has nothing to do with winning elections by winning more votes, the way we all thought it happened. And he couldn't help but reveal that today. He was in Michigan, a battleground state that's become a top priority for Republicans. They widely believe that the Senate seat being vacated by the Democrat Gary Peters is winnable, and perhaps the GOP's best opportunity to pick up a Senate seat this year. Trump was supposedly there to promote Republicans' economic agenda, but what he had to say didn't match up with the experiences that many Americans are facing. There was, again, no mention of the high gas prices caused by his war of choice with Iran. No mention of the bipartisan housing bill that became law without his signature and despite his attempt to stonewall it. He did, however, rail against mail-in ballots, talking up restrictive voter ID and onerous proof of citizenship requirements, and peddling his voter suppression bill known as the Save America Act, a bill that would likely disenfranchise more than 21 million voters who can't readily access the right kind of documents that they would need to prove that they were eligible to vote, which is exactly how he showed his hand. The event had all the trappings of a typical campaign rally, but there's no getting around the fact that Donald Trump's midterm strategy isn't really about campaigning. It's not about winning over more voters. It's about controlling who gets to vote. Trump ramped up his pressure campaign today against the Republican Senate Majority Leader John Thune, demanding that Thune cancel the Senate's planned August recess unless and until it passes the Save America Act. Now, a handful of Republican senators, we'll call them the enablers, led by the Utah Senator Mike Lee, say that they support Donald Trump's call for canceling the break and getting the Save America Act passed. Trump wants Thune to blow up the filibuster in the Senate so that he can pass this massive voter suppression bill 99 days before an election with only a simple majority in the Senate rather than the 60 votes that's needed by the filibuster. But even that wouldn't be enough because all Democrats and 4 Republicans are opposed to that measure. So it would only get him to 49 votes. But the Save America Act Hail Mary is just one of Trump's strategies. He's working on a number of other angles. Back in March, he issued an executive order that sought to change the rules around mail-in voting and give the federal government more control over elections across the country. The executive order directed the government to create a federal list of eligible voters. It told the U.S. Postal Service that it can only deliver ballots to people who are on that list. 23 states plus the District of Columbia challenged that law or that executive order, and earlier this year a federal judge ruled in their favor, noting that the Constitution gives states the power to administer elections, not the president. Since then, an injunction has blocked the order from taking effect in those 23 states plus D.C. that were party to the lawsuit. And over the weekend, the First Circuit Court of Appeals upheld that ruling. But Trump is now running to the Supreme Court in a last-ditch effort to change the rules around mail-in voting. Today, the Trump administration filed an emergency appeal asking the justices to reverse the rulings and calling the injunction in place, quote, indefensible. The case will appear on the Supreme Court's shadow docket, which means that the justices can rule at any time without a hearing and without having to explain themselves. The Save America Act, Trump's mail-in voting executive order have failed so far because they don't stand up to scrutiny. It's not our scrutiny. They don't live up to the standards that Congress and the court demands, especially when it involves something as important as election laws. But the attacks on elections are coming from within the administration as well, out of the public eye. In early June, when Trump installed a housing official and an election denier named Bill Pulte to be the interim director of national intelligence, that raised some red flags among Democrats and Republicans alike. Pulte, you probably know this by heart now, Pulte had no experience in any kind of intelligence. But it seems that that's not the point, because that's not why Trump put him in the job. Trump put him in charge of the entire American intelligence apparatus in order to push his long-debunked 2020 election conspiracies as a means to help undermine this year's midterm elections, which Republicans generally look set to lose. Pulte has been part of Trump's latest gambit to comb through thousands of classified government documents looking for evidence that the 2020 election was rigged. And he's been on a firing spree across the intelligence community, announcing his fourth round of layoffs in his 5-week tenure in the position. Pulte is only on the job on a temporary basis. But the guy Trump nominated to succeed him, this man, Jay Clayton, doesn't instill much confidence either. During his confirmation hearings 2 weeks ago, Clayton refused to say who won the 2020 election. Despite that, he's on the verge of becoming the next director of national intelligence, a guy who can't tell you what happened in the 2020 election. That's not actually significant intelligence. That's basically available, Googleable fact. The Senate just cleared one final procedural hearing. That sets up a final vote for Clayton's confirmation later this week. These are the actions of an administration that does not think it can win based on the merits or on the strength of its political agenda. Sowing doubts about the midterms is no longer a fringe operation. It is the executive branch's official position. And for his part, Trump is showing little interest in convincing anyone of anything. His efforts are all aimed at seizing and holding on to power.
I'm a little bit upset because in 2.5 years, you may have a different president. May. I won 3 times. Now I'm going to do it again. Thank you. I'm going to do it. Should be easy.
Joining me is Zach Beecham. He's a senior correspondent at Vox. He's the author of The Reactionary Spirit, How America's Most Insidious Political Traditions Have Swept the World. Zach, thanks for being with us. You know, when you saw Donald Trump put that 2020 hat on, it was at the White House Correspondents' Dinner redo on Friday night. He claimed he was joking, but, you know, he sells that merchandise. It's a thing people wear. I've seen people with that hat and carrying those signs, Trump 2028, which according to his math would be 4 elections, I think, that he's won, because he's won 3, he said. It's a joke, but it's not a joke.
Right. I mean, this is a way in which something that was once in the mainstream, once out of the mainstream of politics is taken into it, right? You repeat it so many times as a joke as, oh no, I couldn't possibly be serious about this. I would never do this. And then it moves into it because a normalized thing for people to accustom themselves to. Now, in this case, I actually don't think it's working. It's very interesting, right? Because Trump has been doing this 2028 trial balloon for a while, and a bunch of people in his own party have already come out and said they don't believe it could happen. Like, they don't believe it's constitutional, because it obviously isn't, right? And even Trump has said at times, I don't think I'm going to do it. So part of me thinks that even he recognizes that this is a ridiculous gambit, given like what the Constitution says. The text is very clear. On the other hand, I think he really would like to win again. Right. He thinks that he should be able to do whatever he wants. And so he likes the idea of being able to say, I can do this. I can run again. And what are you going to do? Who's going to tell me I can't? Right.
So he's got the same numbers. He's got the same numbers everybody else does, right? He's running in the mid to low 30s in terms of popularity, which is not uninteresting given that a third of Americans don't vote. I mean, that's mathematically Donald Trump could win an election. But all the things he's doing right now aren't the actions of somebody who's trying to win an election. The gerrymandering, the Save America Act, the mail-in ballots, that's all stuff that's designed to keep people who you think don't vote for you from voting for you.
No,
or from voting for somebody else.
It's a totally bizarre strategy, right? Because he could be doing things that could help shave on the margins. Like, if you look at authoritarians in other countries in similar circumstances, they don't just try to throw the election. What they do is they try to run up the vote as much as they can in legitimate ways and supplement it through the things that might rightly be called cheating, right? Gerrymandering, as you just mentioned, trying to disqualify people from the ballot, etc. Trump is like, it's like he's only interested in half of that formula, because the policies that he's pursuing on like a sort of substantive level are tanking his approval rating. The Iran war is a total disaster. He has no plan at all to deal with the affordability crisis. Even these own agenda items, like focusing on this stuff, is inherently unpopular because it trades off with doing things that might make actual Americans want to vote for him. So he's taking these sort of like Hail Mary shots at trying to stack the electoral deck in his favor while not doing the things that actually might be able to minimize damage in the midterms. It really is a president who seems to believe that if the election is legitimate, he will lose, or his party will lose.
Right, because there was this housing bill, right, which ultimately did pass because it had such an overwhelming majority in both houses. It was a thing that Republicans wanted to be able to take home to their constituents and say, see, we passed a bill that actually might help you. They haven't passed a lot of bills that would help people, but that would have been a big one. That would have actually affected housing prices, and you could claim some success for it. And Donald Trump actually worked against it.
Yeah, it's, again, totally bizarre, right? Like, the only way to make sense of Trump's behavior sometimes is that he has these very idiosyncratic views, and one of them that are sort of like not connectable to like political reality, right? And one of them is that he's a longtime NIMBY. He just, like, if you listen to the way that he talks about housing prices, he genuinely sympathizes with people who wants houses to say extremely expensive. It's his background as a real estate guy, right? Like, he wants to buy a property and then make money on that property increasing in value. And he thinks everybody should be able to do that. That's like, so his weird idiosyncrasy here, right? His personal background is actually directly antithetical to what the country as a whole needs, or what would make him more popular, right? Which is to say, trying to lower the cost of living. It's the number one issue in virtually every poll for most Americans. And what is he doing? He's doing the exact opposite of that, right? And he doesn't, I don't know. I don't know if no one's there to tell him. I don't know if he just doesn't understand it. I don't know if he's just old and ornery and stuck in his ways and won't change. But the housing bill's a perfect example. He just does not, is, I think in many ways, completely out of contact with political reality.
Interesting thing that's happening. John Ossoff is a big part of it, but most members of the Senate are doing this, where they're asking any appointee for a job or anybody who's testifying in the Senate to talk about the 2020 election, given that Donald Trump is still talking about the 2020 election and who won it. Jay Clayton, for instance, the head of the Southern District of New York, noted for its independence in terms of federal prosecutors. Jay Clayton is the guy who is now set to become the director of national intelligence. The smart guy. He's had a lot of prosecutorial experience. He was with the Securities and Exchange Commission, largely respected as a guy who has capabilities, unlike Bill Pulte. Even he couldn't bring himself to say it. None of these Trump appointees will say in public under oath that Donald Trump lost the 2020 election, or even conversely, that Joe Biden won the 2020 election. They'll just say it was certified for Joe Biden. I think this is really worrisome, that these are senior government officials and they're still getting past the Senate. They're still getting approved.
Because this is like a no-win situation from the point of view of senators, right? Because Trump will pull a nominee if they say that Joe Biden won the 2020 election. He will withdraw that nomination and he will pick somebody else. Because for him, this is an absolute litmus loyalty test. He values loyalty above all else. And if you are disloyal to Trump by saying that Biden won the election, you're done. You're not trustworthy. You're out. Right? Which is to say, if you are a reliable public servant who's willing to tell the truth, even when it's politically inconvenient, you are not useful to this White House. And so then senators have to blanket not confirm anyone the Trump administration nominates to a sensitive position, or they have to allow people to say this ridiculous stuff, this obviously false stuff, and still approve them anyway. Now, if it was a Democratic Senate, maybe no one would be appointed, right? Maybe they'd be able to set a red line there. But in a Republican Senate, a lot of Republicans, and we all basically know this for a fact, even if they don't publicly say it, they know that this is totally insane behavior. They know it's pathological, and they approve them anyway out of party loyalty, because that to them is sort of the lesser of the two evils here. And it's, as you say, worrying on a sort of an elemental level. Yeah. For a democracy, right? Because that's what you have elected representatives for, is to use their judgment to say that this is wrong and this is damaging. And regardless of whether or not I'm on a political team, I should be doing something to preserve the essential integrity of the political system. Yes. They are not doing that. They're doing the exact opposite of that in these cases.